stockpiling because of the formation of the IEA. So people were buying crude for stockpiling. And then also there was some economic boost in the world. There was increased consumption. But OPEC read the stockpiling and the consumption all as consumption. That pushed OPEC to invest in additional capacities. And at the same time, while prices were going up, Alaska was developed, North Sea was developed, even Canadian shale oil was developed. And if you look back again into the 60s, where we were getting reports brainwashing people that oil is going to run out, the Russians will be importing oil in 1985 or something, and these were secret documents or confidential reports which people pass without telling you that these are available for sale in New York. You buy them for $5, but written on them confidential, and they pass around. Then people were thinking that really it's going to be a shortage. And one of the elements was to push prices up. Then we came to the end of the 70s. Alaska was on, North Sea was on, other deep water production was on, and stockpiling stopped. It was reached the limit. And then we had the collapse. So that phase that followed was the retreat and the collapse of the 80s. And the prices went
talk a little bit about the revolutionary phase of MENA, which may have been around the time you were starting to think about getting into the energy industry. I don't know where your age is at exactly, but I'm wondering, as a legacy in Saudi Arabia in that time, which obviously was a very turbulent time in the region as well as in the kingdom, how did it come about to start to draw the talent like you and all of your peers to get into the industry at that time, given that turbulent backdrop?
Well, at that time, most of the professionals in Saudi and maybe all over this region were expatriates, coming to work on in the oil industry and helping developing in the fields and producing them. And at that time, the government decided that they want to develop their own people, to take over the industry and take over most of the technical positions that were occupied by the expats. And for that, they started sending people on scholarships to the, West, to the US and Europe and so on. And there was, like a boom in education in the region, and lots of people went to petroleum engineering and other disciplines of engineering. And from that time on, if you look at Saudi Aramco, for example, there were a big percentage of expatriates taking over technical positions, to a point, recently, that most of those positions are held by locals, by Saudis. Going back to the 60s, to the circumstances were different. At that time, U.S. had a lot of reserves, and their production was the highest in the world. And because of that, they were controlling also the market. It's not OPEC. But then OPEC started developing their, production capacity, while the U.S. was going into decline. And the U.S. being the biggest consumer of crude oil, starting from being exporter to importer. And when that happened, the OPEC had its, stand and in the oil market.
Ali, you mentioned there about the process. How do you build the process to become credible? How do you build the institutions? At what point do you think OPEC became a credible, powerful international organization? And in terms of the 70s, what impact that had on the group and the individual countries?
I believe that the OPEC started to be polishing its image and its credibility more in recent years. Because, and the credibility, what I mean as an image-wise, whenever OPEC looked at as a political organization, that's not really, and I would say, a good image for the OPEC. Whenever the OPEC, which is on the, I would say, more than a decade for sure, okay, close to 15 years or close to 20 years now, the OPEC been gradually creating its image as an economical organization, looking at the economic side of the business, not looking at the political side of the business. That's what's been created a credibility for the OPEC. This is number one. Number two, when the OPEC departed from...
Can I just jump in on that point, that the credibility of the last 20 years was achieved to a certain point because OPEC and its individual members had taken control of their own destiny, so they could start to manage a more sort of technocratic style of approach to the organization, whereas the first 30 years was slightly more confrontational in the process of taking control of the assets. Would that be a fair assessment, do you think?
Let me, Sean, elaborate a little more over here. For example, UAE, when joined the OPEC, it was not the objective is to nationalize. That's not the point, to nationalize. The objective is to coordinate policies, to be a part of producing countries where looking into our natural resources. That's the main objective over here. It's not nationalizing your resources.
But you did say it was about taking hold of your own destiny. So the two are
hold of your own destiny is not by nationalization, by doing a better coordination, by working closely and having, I would say, equitable agreements and serving relationship with the international partners. That's what we need. You have a control over destiny, which is at the mutual interest, okay, between resource holder and the developers. This is one side. The other side, OPEC for a period of time been going through fixed price that everybody has to price as a certain price reference. Dr. Ramzi maybe have better history on this. Maybe they go back to Arab life, I believe, at a certain time. So there was fixed prices. So that's actually perceived the OPEC as fixing prices, which is I believe that was in a time in a history which had put in the OPEC to be called as a cartel or to be called as a monopoly, whatever. But for a good period of time, I would say for many different reasons, due to change of the economic environment, the OPEC member countries seeing that the economics is the main driver than politics. Also, they have we have been in a group of ministers who think of economics. I would say, for example, an excellent example like Minister Ali Naimi, he think of the cohesion of the organization. He's an example, but the rest of the ministers seeing it different than playing a political role in there. So that's made a difference. Again, the ministers, the credentials of the ministers, the quality of the ministers who've been having, being part of the OPEC, who convey the message between their government and being on the organization, that made a big difference.
Dr. Salman, on that point, Ali makes, you were Deputy OPEC Secretary General around that time in the 90s when Ali's indicating OPEC made this change. Minister Naimi, I believe, came into being minister first in the mid-90s and had a very big, one would regard as a big technocratic impact on the organization. But from your view, do you share the view that OPEC did make a shift around that time from being one driven by politics to one driven by economics and more technocratic approach?
Well, I think OPEC got more credibility after the wars. The way OPEC managed to maintain supplies during the wars.
The wars.
The wars. Yes.
As in what? The Gulf War One?
Both wars.
The Iran-Iraq War?
Iran-Iraq War, and then the Gulf War.
There's been a few. We just want to clarify which
Yeah.
ones we're talking about.
We have too many of them. That gave them a little credibility in that sense, and also shifting from pricing system. But the biggest disaster was, of course, that when prices went from above $40 early 80s to $3 and $4 at the market share fiasco, which was a Yamani idea. But he didn't get the blame for it because he put Ali Sabah and Sobroto as front for it, and he was manipulating them from behind. And that failed, and they got the same two people to come and change things and go back to a fixed price system. There, OPEC lost credibility a lot. And even some people wrote its obituary. OPEC is dead, finished, and goodbye. But then after 1991, OPEC started getting better press, more understanding, more contacts. And with the start, and a good indicator of that, the consumer-producer dialogue started in 1991, which meant that the consumers and the industrial powers considered OPEC a serious entity to deal with. And then we had this dialogue starting in 1991,